The tragic news surrounding Eustace Conway has been building for years. And now there is clear proof of what happened. Building inspection records exposed more than 20 condemned structures on his Turtle Island preserve. Every single one was erected without a permit. Court filings proved a woman lost her eye during a slingshot demonstration on his property, and that the $75,000 settlement he agreed to pay was never fully honored. A police report confirmed he was arrested for trespassing on a neighbor's land, and when government officials ordered Turtle Island shut down and declared it unsafe for every man, woman, and child who walked through those gates, the most beloved star of mountain men had nowhere left to hide. Socially, legally, politically, I'm not very familiar with this situation. I think they call it a fish out of water when I feel like getting involved in something like this. This is all documented: inspection reports, lawsuits, arrest records, and legislative hearings that the show carefully edited around for years. The mountain man who taught America how to live free was being buried by proof of what he'd done. And what came next nearly finished him for good. 20 structures, 0 permits. It's the fall of 2012, and Mountain Men is exploding on the History Channel. Millions of Americans are tuning in every week to watch Eustace Conway tan deer hides, forge tools in his blacksmith shop, and teach young apprentices how to build shelters the way people did 300 years ago. The show is painting him as a wise, rugged teacher, a man who represents everything America used to be. Viewers are captivated. Ratings are climbing, but behind the cameras, something very different is happening. North Carolina building inspectors are walking through Turtle Island Preserve, clipboards in hand. And what they're finding is setting off every alarm they have. Over 20 structures on the property have never been permitted, never been inspected, never been evaluated by anyone with the authority to say whether they're safe for the hundreds of people who pass through every year. And get this, these aren't private cabins where Eustace sleeps at night. These are buildings that host paying guests and school groups. Children bust in from across the state to learn history by living it. The inspectors are documenting structural safety failures, fire hazards in buildings where groups gather and sleep, sanitation systems that don't come close to meeting basic health codes, fire safety equipment completely missing, no extinguishers, no marked exits, nothing any modern facility would be required to have. Electrical work, where it exists at all, violates every standard on the books. Code-wise, there's nothing that even applies. Consider stuff like this, because nobody was building houses or structures this way at all when the concept of building code enforcement started to exist. From the government's perspective, this isn't a charming historical exhibit. This is a public facility operating completely outside the law, and people, including children, are using it every single week. The inspectors have a legal obligation to act. And what they're about to do will change Eustace Conway's life forever. Here's the catch: Eustace doesn't see it that way. Not even close. He's been running Turtle Island for 25 years without a single person being injured by a structural failure. Thousands of students have passed through these exact buildings. He built every one of these structures with his own hands, using methods that kept human beings alive on this continent for centuries before any building code was ever written. The idea that some government inspector can walk onto his land and declare his life's work unsafe strikes him as not just wrong, but deeply offensive. It's an attack on everything he's sacrificed for, and Eustace Conway does not take attacks lying down. His supporters agree. Online, his fans are going to war for him, calling the inspectors government bullies trying to destroy a way of life that was here long before any bureaucrat had a clipboard. Comment sections and message boards are flooding with outrage. People are calling it government overreach, an assault on individual freedom and the traditional American values that Eustace represents better than anyone alive. But his critics see something entirely different. A man who's been operating a public facility for over 2 decades without following the same safety rules that every school, church, summer camp, and community center in America is required to follow. Rules that exist for a reason. Rules that exist because people get seriously hurt when buildings aren't up to code. Rules that protect children who can't protect themselves, and some of those critics live right next door. The neighbors are done being quiet. Complaints are pouring in from people who've lived next to Turtle Island for years. Some have legitimate safety concerns about the structures and the activities happening on the property. Others are frustrated by the noise, traffic, and constant disruptions that come from living beside a place that operates like an 18th-century frontier settlement in the middle of a modern community. The national spotlight from the TV show has taken years of quiet grumbling and transformed it into formal, documented complaints filed with county authorities, complaints that officials can no longer ignore. Eustace isn't just dealing with government bureaucrats anymore. He's surrounded on all sides, and the walls are closing in fast. Those closest to him, friends, supporters, people who've dedicated years of their own lives to Turtle Island, are begging him to bend, just cooperate with the inspectors. File the permits. Make the changes they're asking for. Keep the doors open. Save what you've built, even if it means swallowing your pride. But here's what you have to understand about Eustace Conway. Compromise is a word that has never existed in this man's vocabulary. My dream is to teach people about the traditional mountain ways, survival skills, the homesteading skills, back to nature, this sort of traditional lore of all early people. Not once in his entire adult life has he bent to outside pressure. Not when his family questioned his choices. Not when people called him crazy. Not when decades of hard living wore his body down to the bone, and he is not about to start bending now. Not for inspectors. Not for neighbors. Not for anyone. The kid who walked into the woods and never came back to understand why Eustace Conway would rather lose everything than file a building permit. You have to understand what drove him into the mountains in the first place, that he didn't come from the backwoods. His father was a chemical engineer with a corporate job in South Carolina. His mother raised the family in comfortable suburban surroundings. Nothing about his childhood suggested he'd reject every piece of modern civilization, but his parents taught him self-reliance. They took him camping. His father showed him how to hunt and move through the woods, and somewhere along the way, something clicked inside this kid that never turned off. At 17, Eustace walked away from conventional society and moved into the Appalachian wilderness permanently. He built his own shelter with hand tools, hunted his own food, and taught himself skills most Americans hadn't practiced in over a century. He eventually rode horseback from the Atlantic to the Pacific, a 2-year, 4,000-mile journey where he lived entirely off the land. His siblings chose normal careers. His mother worried herself sick. None of it mattered. In 1987 he bought 1,000 acres of mountain land and founded Turtle Island Preserve. The mission: teach people the traditional skills modern life had nearly erased: blacksmithing, hide tanning, animal tracking, primitive shelter building. Schools sent students by the busload. Adults traveled from across the country. Eustace never married, never had children. Turtle Island was his family. His students were his legacy. So when inspectors showed up in 2012 and told him his buildings needed permits, Eustace didn't hear a reasonable request. He heard someone telling him that everything he'd given his life to was wrong, and that is something this man will fight to the death before accepting. In 2013, Turtle Island is officially ordered closed to visitors by government mandate. The property is deemed unsafe until every violation is corrected. For Eustace, this is existential. Turtle Island is his home, his income, and his entire reason for being alive. Turtle Island Preserve is dedicated to being off the grid and teaching about natural, sustainable, renewable life practices, the ways of our ancestors. We've been doing it for over 30 years. Being shut down means no students, no revenue, and the very real possibility that everything he's built over 25 years could be permanently destroyed. The slingshot that changed everything. But the building codes aren't the only proof that something has gone badly wrong at Turtle Island. years before mountain men existed, before the cameras, before the fame, there was Kimberly Baker. It's 2005. Turtle Island is running one of its regular educational demonstrations, the kind Eustace has done hundreds of times. A group is gathered for a hands-on lesson in primitive tools. Today's lesson involves a slingshot, traditional design, the kind of weapon ancestors used for thousands of years. A rock is loaded. The slingshot is drawn. And something goes catastrophically wrong. The rock launches and strikes Kimberly Baker directly in the eye. The impact is immediate and devastating. She doesn't just suffer an injury, she loses her vision in that eye permanently. One moment she's a participant in a hands-on educational experience. The next, her life has been altered forever, and she's standing on Eustace Conway's property when it happens, at an event he organized, during a demonstration that, according to her lawsuit, was conducted without the basic safety precautions that should have been in place to protect participants from exactly this kind of accident. She sues. The case grinds through the legal system for years and is eventually settled in 2009 for $75000. That's a significant amount of money for anyone, but for a man who lives without electricity and supports himself entirely through educational program fees and donations, it's enormous. Still, Eustace agrees to pay. The matter should be closed, but it's not that simple, though. In 2013, right in the middle of the building code nightmare, right as Mountain Men is making Eustace a household name across America, Kimberly Baker files a new lawsuit. Her claim: the settlement payments were never made in full. Eustace Conway, she alleges, owes her money from the original agreement and has not honored what he promised to pay. The timing is absolutely devastating. This isn't gossip or internet speculation. Major newspapers, the Deseret News, the Star Tribune, are running the story with details pulled directly from court filings. The man America watches on television every week, the guy who teaches self-reliance and honor and keeping your word, is now publicly accused of failing to pay a woman who lost her eye on his land. For his critics, this is the proof they've been looking for. For his supporters, it's another unfair pile-on from a system designed to crush anyone who dares to live differently. But either way, the legal bills are stacking up fast, and no amount of blacksmith work or deer hides is going to cover what he owes. Arrested on his own mountain, and the hits keep coming. December 2012. Mountain Men is building its audience. Eustace is becoming a household name, and then he's arrested. Second-degree trespassing. A neighbor accuses him of crossing onto her property and blocking her gate, leading to a confrontation that ends with police involvement. Think about that for a second. The man who teaches respect for the land, for natural boundaries, for living in harmony with your surroundings, this man is being charged with violating someone else's property line. For someone whose entire identity is built on reverence for the land and honest, principled living, this is a gut punch that cuts far deeper than the legal charge itself. The arrest generates headlines across North Carolina at the exact moment he's trying to fight the building inspectors and deal with the Baker lawsuit. It's the worst possible timing. The crazy part is the charges don't stick. In April 2013 the case is dismissed for insufficient evidence, but that doesn't matter. Not really. The arrest was reported in newspapers across the state. The story traveled well beyond North Carolina. And for a man whose entire brand is built on integrity and principle, being arrested, even when the charges completely evaporate, leaves a stain that no legal dismissal can fully wash away. His supporters insist it was a setup, a neighbor looking for leverage during the building code disputes, someone trying to pile on while Eustace was already down. His critics see a pattern forming. A man who genuinely believes the rules of modern society simply don't apply to him, whether those rules involve building permits, lawsuit settlements, or property boundaries. Everything hits at once. By mid-2013, Eustace Conway is fighting on every front simultaneously, and losing ground on all of them. Turtle Island is shut down. His income has evaporated. The Baker settlement is back in court. The trespassing arrest is dragging through the system. Building inspectors are demanding changes he considers a betrayal of his principles. Personally, I would be embarrassed to build to the standards of the modern low minimum code, right? I wouldn't think about building minimum code. I'm the exact same way. Lawyers are billing by the hour. Court dates are stacking up. And through all of it, Mountain Men keeps airing every week, showing viewers a rugged, confident mountain man who appears completely in control. The disconnect between the TV version and reality is staggering. Most fans have absolutely no idea how much trouble their favorite mountain man is really in. Hands down, this is the lowest point of Eustace Conway's life. The man who could survive anything the wilderness threw at him, blizzards, starvation, injury, months of isolation, is being crushed by paperwork and courtrooms. Friends notice something they've never seen. He looks worn down. Not from splitting logs or hauling stone, from sitting in attorneys' offices and reading legal notices. Decades of backbreaking labor never broke this man. The legal system is doing what the Appalachian Mountains never could, but Eustace doesn't quit. He never has. The publicity surrounding his case forces the government's hand. In 2013, the North Carolina General Assembly passes House Bill 774, creating exemptions for primitive camps from certain modern building standards. The law is written specifically for situations like his. Traditional educational camps using historical construction methods that were never meant to be judged by suburban building codes. His supporters celebrate it as vindication, but the victory is brutal and expensive, and it fixes far less than people think. The new law doesn't automatically reopen Turtle Island. Not even close. Eustace still has to work with the same inspectors he's been fighting, going building by building to determine what qualifies for exemption and what still has to be demolished or brought up to code. He has to hire more lawyers. He has to submit formal plans for structures he built by hand without a single drawing, accept modifications to buildings he constructed with logs he cut from his own forest. Every compromise feels like a small surrender of the principles he spent his entire adult life defending. The process drags on for years. Turtle Island eventually reopens, but under conditions he never wanted, with changes he swore he'd never make, at a financial and emotional cost that will take him years to recover from. He survived, but the man who came out the other side is not quite the same man who went in. And then comes the blow he never sees coming. In 2017, Preston Roberts dies of cancer. Preston, Eustace's best friend, his fellow mountain man on the show, the one person at Turtle Island who truly understood what this life meant, the sacrifice, the purpose, the bone-deep belief that these skills and this way of living matter more than comfort or convenience. Preston had appeared alongside Eustace from the very beginning and was one of the most beloved figures on Mountain Men. They had worked side by side for years, sharing a bond that only two people who've chosen the same impossible path could truly understand. His death hits Eustace harder than any lawsuit, arrest, or government order ever could. You can fight an inspector. You can argue with a judge. You can stare down a neighbor who wants you gone, but you can't argue with cancer. You can't outwork it or outlast it the way you outlast a mountain winter. People who know Eustace say something fundamental shifted after Preston died. The fire is still there. The stubbornness hasn't gone anywhere. But it burns quieter now. Well, buddy, I secured that land. Yeah, we're going to keep it wild. I knew you'd appreciate that. The rage that fueled years of legal battles has given way to something heavier and harder to name, losing the one person who truly shared the mission, without ever needing any of it explained, left a hole that no amount of determination or willpower can fill. The mountain man at 60 today, Eustace Conway, is in his 60s and still living at Turtle Island Preserve. Most of the legal battles are behind him, settled through legislative change, expensive compromise, and decades of sheer persistence. The property is open. Educational programs continue. Though they're smaller and quieter than the peak mountain men years, students still come to learn blacksmithing, hide tanning, and primitive construction. Schools still send groups to experience hands-on history that no textbook can deliver, but the years show hard, decades of extreme physical labor in the Appalachian Mountains have taken a visible toll on his body. He moves slower now. The work that once came effortlessly requires more time and more help. His appearances on Mountain Men have become less frequent, partly by choice, partly because the show has expanded its cast and storylines over the years. Money remains a constant, grinding pressure. Program fees, occasional donations, and whatever television income still trickles in barely keep the preserve operational. The debts from his legal wars took years to pay down, and the financial margin at Turtle Island remains razor thin. One bad season could tip the balance. Younger apprentices now work alongside him, maintaining the property and running the programs he can no longer handle alone. These are people who chose this difficult, low-paying life over conventional careers because they believe these skills are worth preserving. They're his best hope, and maybe his only hope, that Turtle Island doesn't die when he does, but that's the question nobody can answer. And it's one that gets more urgent with every passing year. What happens to Turtle Island after Eustace is gone? Will the next generation carry it forward? Will the land be sold and bulldozed for housing? Will 35 years of conservation and education just disappear? Nobody knows, and that uncertainty is what keeps the people who care about this place up at night. For now, Eustace keeps doing what he's always done, just slower. He works with his hands. He teaches anyone willing to learn. He stays connected to the 1,000 acres that shaped his entire adult life. It's the end result of everything I'm after. I'm just trying to make the world a better place, one individual at a time, and be able to make their life better. The cameras come around less. The energy isn't what it used to be. But the man hasn't changed. He's still Eustace Conway, still living on his own terms, still paying the price every single day. Do you think places like Turtle Island should be held to the same building codes as a modern school? Or should traditional camps get a pass? And is Eustace Conway a stubborn hero, or a man who put people at risk by ignoring the rules everyone else has to follow? Tell us in the comments. Like and subscribe for more deep dives like this one. And check out the video on your screen right now.